Good morning, everyone. On behalf of all 4 nations of the UK, it's a really great pleasure to welcome you all here today. My name's Mary Macalpine. I have the great privilege of being Scotland's Minister for Environment and Land Reform, and with colleagues right across the Scottish Government, having responsibility for the delivery of Scotland's environmental ambitions and obligations, which include our ambition to be net zero by 2045 and to be nature positive by 2030. And that's very ambitious, actually. And one of the reasons that we can afford to be so ambitious is because of the ample opportunity within our natural world to support biodiversity and to sequester and to store carbon. So to put that in context, that ample opportunity, we have less than 1/10 of the UK's population, but 1/3 of the land mass. And we're trying to make progress with that enormous natural asset. Over half of the areas protected for nature in the UK are in Scotland, and around 1/4 of our land mass are those precious peatlands, which, when restored, can support biodiversity, sequester carbon, and indeed create good green jobs in our rural communities. And in the last 3 years, in each of the last 3 years, we have been responsible for creating 80% of all woodlands in the UK in Scotland. And that's not to mention our marine environment, which again, we feel exceptionally fortunate to have. It is 6 times larger than our land mass, and 37% of it is currently within marine protected area zoning. So we're very proud of what we've achieved. We acknowledge how fortunate we are to have this incredible natural world, but we know we can't be complacent. There is a great deal of work to do, and we will only get to where we are, firstly by acknowledging the crises that we face, our dual crises of climate change and nature loss, and secondly, by collaborating with one another, sharing our experiences, sharing our challenges and our opportunities. So with that, I think I'll pause and hand you over to the experts in this regard, but I hope you have a lovely day and a good event, and thank you very much for joining us.
Minister, thank you so much for those opening remarks. It's wonderful that you were able to join us this morning. And to add to your welcome, I'd like to add from myself, the moderator for this session, a further welcome to what I hope will be a fascinating discussion opening Nature Day in the UK Pavilion. And this morning, we've got a great panel of contributors who are going to touch on the theme of nature-based solutions. This is a relatively new concept which has driven into the discussion on climate change over the last couple of years, really. And it's come alongside the realisation that we don't only have a climate change emergency upon us, but also a nature emergency, seen in the degradation of ecosystems and a mass extinction of animals and plants taking place globally. And one of the tasks that humanity must now rise to is to find the sweet spots that lie between those two emergencies and to combine efforts that can address both at once. And that is something that we at Natural England have been putting a great deal of effort into thinking about during recent times, working with our colleagues in Nature Scot, the Northern Ireland Environment Department, Natural Resources Wales and the Joint Nature Conservation Committee, coming together recently to publish a report called Nature Positive 2030, which is about bending the curve of decline to recovery and lying alongside net zero as being a twin objective as we decarbonise the economy and go low carbon, at the same time to go high nature. Just to give you a little flavour of some of what we have found through our report, I'm just going to show you a very quick video and then I will be introducing the panel. Thank you.
What does nature positive mean? The UK is one of the most nature depleted nations on Earth. Over 40% of UK species are in decline.
We no longer have a sustainable natural system that can provide a reliable source of clean water, purify our air, regulate our climate, and secure our food supplies.
It's time to act now for our natural world on our planet. At COP26, the world has a critical opportunity to tackle the climate crisis and biodiversity loss. These crises must be tackled together, or we will fix neither. This film gives 4 examples of places around the UK where we are acting together for our natural world. The global rate of deforestation between 2015 to 2020 was around 10 million hectares per year. There is a partnership of neighbouring land managers who are working together to create a wilder landscape.
Cairngorms Connect is the largest habitat restoration project in the UK, and we've got an ambitious 200-year vision to restore and enhance habitat, species and ecological processes across this vast area. By working with nature, we can help to combat the effects of climate change and biodiversity loss across the country.
Coastal habitats provide a protective buffer against storm surges with rising sea levels. Now the Oakborough Flats project has revitalised the whole area with a mix of new and traditional, but all sustainable, jobs and habitat.
The Oakborough project is helping prevent further biodiversity loss.
But it also creates an area of tranquility and beauty for the local communities to come and enjoy.
By working in a collaborative and partnership way, we've actually been able to create such a vast, huge site, and in doing that, it's delivered a truly wonderful site that will be here for years and generations to come.
Nearly 95% of the UK's natural carbon is stored in the UK soils, most of which are in our peatlands. The bog at Garran Plateau has now been restored, benefiting biodiversity, absorbing carbon, providing wildlife habitats and helping water quality.
In the 1960s and the 1970s, drains were dug through the bog to try and reclaim the land to be agriculturally useful.
1,000 drains in total were blocked to raise the water level here at the Garran Plateau.
And once the bog started to re-wet, the sphagnum species in the area really started to recolonise again. They're capturing carbon from the atmosphere, but they're also providing a food bank for a lot of the species around the area.
More than 5 million people live and work in 2.4 million properties that are at risk of flooding from rivers or the sea. A project in Cardiff, Greener Grangetown, was driven by a need to reduce volumes of rainwater entering Cardiff's sewer system.
One of the main parts of this project for us was to make sure that it was something that could demonstrate how beneficial a sustainable drainage scheme can be and allow people to have a better understanding and a better education, a better awareness of the wildlife that's on their doorstep.
This scheme was about adding canopies, not taking them away. So we engineered around trees and didn't remove them, and added trees and added rain gardens.
We need to transform our relationship with nature to one of nature-positive interdependence and restoration. It is not too late. There are many fantastic examples across the UK where action for nature is working, with wildlife recovering. We all have a role to play. We know what to do and how to do it. The time to act together is now.
Marvellous. So, over to this morning's panel. My name is Tony Juniper. I'm the chairman of Natural England. It's my pleasure to moderate the session this morning. Elizabeth Watuti from Green Generation Initiative, I think is just stuck in security, but will be joining us soon. We have Mike Moorcrofts, Principal Specialist on Climate Change at Natural England, coordinating lead author for the IPCC, with us this morning. Sonia Timaya, Global Head of Sustainable Brands at Reckitt's, many years of experience in sustainability with business. Malanding Jaite from the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change and Natural Resources in the Gambia, where he is coordinator for large-scale ecosystem-based adaptation. And Nikki Yoxall, who is a board member of Nature Scott and a member of the Nature Friendly Farming Network, and runs a farming enterprise in the northeast of Scotland where she has a herd of cattle using agroecological techniques. So time is very short, I'm afraid, ladies and gentlemen, but this is a great thing in that so far as we can get the absolute core wisdom from our panelists who have been invited to speak for just 3 minutes each to share some of their experiences of nature-based solutions, what has worked and where challenges lie, just top-line messages, and then hopefully have a little time for some questions, some of which will come through Slido. So I'm going to invite Mike, then Elizabeth, Sonia, Malanding and Nikki in that order. I think it's the same order, not quite the same order we have there, but that's what we'll do this morning. So Mike, over to you, please.
Thank you.
Is there a microphone? Yes. You need a microphone because there's a live feed going out, so you need to pick that up.
Yes, thank you. So protecting and restoring nature, and that has to be right at the centre of any successful attempt to tackle climate change. And at the global scale, it's important to remember that that's not instead of reducing fossil fuel emissions and eliminating them, but as well as, when you look at the global carbon balance, something like 11% of current greenhouse gas or carbon emissions to the atmosphere are coming from land use change, largely from deforestation. But also, even more importantly, more than 50% of anthropogenic carbon emissions, human carbon emissions, are taken up by the natural environments in both on the land and in the sea. So it has to be at the heart. Now, it's also important to say that it's not just about the carbon balance as well. It's also about the fact that degraded natural systems exacerbate the impacts of climate change on both natural species, but also on people. And the film has shown some approaches for how we can actually start to reverse some of those problems. But it's also worth saying that there are, around the world, plenty of examples where nature-based solutions have been done badly. Trees planted in the wrong place, for example. So it's really critical that we do not just have any old nature-based solutions, but good nature-based solutions. And regardless of how those are funded and all the debates that we can have about the benefits or otherwise of offsetting, there, it seemed to me, 4 lessons we learned from experience. First of all, we need good science. We need to be able to test whether our nature-based solutions are actually delivering what we want them to and what we've claimed they will do, both in terms of carbon and adaptation benefits, but also in terms of whether biodiversity is benefiting. That's point 1. Second point, we need to grow our capacity for practical expertise to actually make these happen on the ground. It's difficult to create a new forest and do it well. It's difficult to restore a peatland. So we need good, practical people. Point 2. Third point, the local community has to be actively on board, leading wherever possible. We need the benefits to be felt locally as well as globally, and to take advantage of local and indigenous knowledge. And finally, we mustn't neglect to protect our existing high carbon and high biodiversity natural places. Protecting existing natural ecosystems needs to be right at the heart of everything we do. Thanks.
Marvellous. Thanks ever so much, Mike. Elizabeth, good morning. You're very welcome. I'm sorry you got delayed on the way in. Would you like to wait until last to catch your breath? Yes. Okay, good. We'll come to you at the end, give you a chance to work out what's going on. But we're very pleased to see you. Thanks ever so much for being here. In which case, Sonia, would you like to share a few thoughts with us? Thank you.
Very happy to, Tony. Oh, never mind.
Yes, you'll need
Hello
that.
all. Good morning. Delighted to be here and on this panel with you all. So we all know from the conversation that climate change and biodiversity are intrinsically linked. Two sides of the same coin. Plants provide a lot of support for life on Earth and absorb 25% of human-made carbon emissions. However, 1 in 5 plant species are at threat of extinction. There's another dimension we'd like to bring in as well. As Reckitt, we work across health, hygiene, and nutrition. And we want to make the link with human health as well. If the last 18 months has taught us anything, is that the rise of zoonotic diseases like COVID are exacerbating what we see as a connection between planetary health and human health. So for us, the solutions do need to connect climate, biodiversity, and people, an integrated approach with no silos. So what are we doing about it? As Reckitt, we've been working across our supply chains and with our partners for a number of years to minimize our impact on the environment. However, at this critical time in history, we know that we must and should do a lot more. We want to move from approaches that look to minimize our impact on ecosystems to regenerative solutions that really does aim to bend that curve of biodiversity loss. And for us, we started with the science, a bit like you mentioned. So we started looking and working with academics to really understand our footprint on ecosystems. We're working with the Oxford University's nature-based insetting team to firstly look at some of our critical supply chains for palm oil, latex, fragrances such as orange oil, to say, how are we impacting ecosystems? And based on what we learn, we're going to develop a roadmap of net zero, nature-positive aligned solutions that really work for across sustainability, for people, for climate and biodiversity. It's all about sustainable livelihoods as much as it is about protecting the environment. Now, while we do that, we also know there's a need to act. So our approach is to have targeted programs in areas that align with our business. So I'm going to give you 2 examples, if I may. Firstly, we're working with WWF in a partnership to restore 2,000 kilometers of fresh water in the Ganges and Amazon. We also have a brand partnership with a brand called Botanica by Airwick, where we really put nature at the heart of what the brand does. And there we're looking to do 2 things. Firstly, raising awareness of the crisis of biodiversity that we have. This conversation sometimes happens in bubbles like this, to be honest. We want to raise awareness with people, our consumers, the people we connect with every day, so they understand we have a crisis of biodiversity and think about the actions they can take in their home, in their backyards, in their communities to address this. And while we do this, we're also working with WWF to restore wildflower habitats in 10 countries, including right here in the UK. Did you know, since the 1930s, we've lost 97% of wildflower meadows? That's an astonishing number. So we're working in 3 regions in East Anglia, working with farmers, working to restore wildflowers in cycle paths, road verges, and floodplains to try and redress that. A bit further afield, in our supply chains for latex, we also have a partnership with the Fair Rubber Association. We're working with 1,000 smallholder farmers to try and promote better agronomy, which, yes, it will improve the yield and the quality of the latex that we use for our condoms under our Durex brand, but also it's about looking at how do we craft regenerative solutions for latex, which is specific to Thailand and the area we're working in. How do we think about an approach that really looks at the social and environmental context and has an approach that fits that? So what are our key 3 takeaways? Our 3 learnings from what we've been doing. Firstly, we need an all-systems-based approach to have solutions that address climate, biodiversity, and people in an integrated way. Secondly, we need to have a science-based, data-driven approach so that the solutions that we're crafting really does tackle the issues that we look to do, and also to monitor progress as we go so we can learn and course correct where we need to. And finally, this stuff is complicated. If it wasn't, we'd all have done a lot more. And what we really need to do is not oversimplify the solutions to tackle this beast. And for us, that's about learning. It's about learning from our academic partners, from the NGOs, from our suppliers, and working up and down our supply chain to address this. And we should also not let complexity lead to paralysis of action. We've all heard about the need for action here. So we absolutely need to have a science-based approach and do more and learn by doing.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sonia. Malanding, would you like to share some thoughts with us?
Yes, very good morning to all, and thank you for inviting me, and I'm really pleased to be here to share with you our experience at the Ecosystem-Based Adaptation project in the Gambia, which of course started as one of the few very early projects supported by GCF. And our goal is to really go out there and restore degraded forest ecosystems as well as degraded agricultural systems. But at the same time, as the earlier speaker said, we also try to do the integrated approach by incorporating the establishment and the promotion of natural resource-based businesses within communities. So in essence, we are trying to do all of these, but at the same time, of course, there are challenges. At the restoration level, we realize that we do not have enough infrastructure, both human capacity as well as within the system, because for the restoration to occur properly, we had to identify the right type of species and also be able to access the seed source for most of those species, which currently do not exist within the project area. So we had to go out there and establish large nurseries capable of producing 1 million seedlings per year. And at the same time, we had to really rely on CBOs and other components of the society to help bring in seeds, not only within the Gambia, but also as far as southern Senegal. And the other aspect is when it comes to identifying what to plant, what species to plant, and how. We relied on the science too. We work with World Agroforestry to at least work with communities at community level. We had this protocol development phase where we more or less systematically went with the communities throughout to identify their major problems within the environment and what they think are their solutions, both in terms of male only and female only, because we realize that there are differences in what needs are and what solutions are when you talk to both male and female separately. And in that process, we identify a whole slew of solutions and activities that we think we could implement over the course of the project. Among them, when it comes to the restoration part, we realize one of the key things is to increase the 3 components across the board. That is a big problem. As a Sahelian country and as one that was totally dependent on, that is still totally dependent on wood fuels, degradation is very, very serious across the board. And then in order to do that, well, we also rely on what we call assisted natural regeneration, especially within community forests, because communities do have areas that they mark as forests that will be protected, that they can protect and help manage, but they do not have the skills. So not only do we have the assisted natural regeneration that is preventing fires and also encouraging new growth, but we also went to the extent of developing plans, management plans for each of those. At the farm level, degraded agricultural farms, we are working with 1,000 farmers, and the back and forth of identifying what is more appropriate comes in terms of species, methods of planting, as well as protection. And of course, there are 1,001 different problems there. One is really land tenure. It is a complicated affair to be within the smallholder agricultural communities in Africa, especially in West Africa, where tenure ownership lies within lineages and male also, not male only and not female. So we're really trying to see how best we can actually make this good for everybody. And the planting also has, we had to adopt certain methods, because for those people who are dependent on commercial farming of groundnuts, they have over the generations believed that no trees means good crops. And that has really reduced the capacity. But a key part of this restoration also, that is agricultural land restoration, is salt-intruded areas. The Gambia being such a flat country and endowed with, at one point, a very great river, now we are having the big problem of any time there is an inch rise in sea level, that thousands of hectares will be flooded in the Gambia with salt water. And a lot of the rice-growing areas are now salt flats and open water. And we are now at the process of trying to see how best we can regenerate those using mangrove. That seems to be the best in terms of success, because whenever you plant a mangrove, nobody wants to touch it, no animal wants to touch it, and it does very well. But the upland areas restoration is complicated. With livestock management, that has been age-old traditional ways of free-range transhumans, and it is something that we had to come back and say, well, we must have policy on it. How do we manage livestock? Because even in the city of Banjul, you have free roaming livestock. You plant today, they come for it tomorrow. So these are very complicated issues, and we certainly are learning as we go. And the business development side also is very complicated, given that we are using things like beekeeping, also sustainable collection of tree leaves for tea, as well as other like baobab. So we are essentially we're trying to. I would say we are at the forefront of this experiment of integrated systems approach, and we would want you to come and check how well we are doing. Hopefully. So, thanks.
It's a beautiful country, Malinding. I've had the pleasure of being there, and you've just encouraged me to come back. Thank you very much indeed. Nikki, please.
Thanks ever so much, Tony. I was going to talk a little bit about some of the strategic work Nature Scott is doing, but I've changed my mind at the last minute, and I'm going to give you a farmer's perspective. So I'd like you to use your imaginations to think of a beautiful green woodland in the middle of summer, dappled light coming through the trees. And now I want you to put a small, mostly black with a bit of white cow with horns standing under one of these trees. And this cow looks really happy and content in the woodland, and she reaches her neck up to start browsing the leaves off the trees. And it's at that moment, when you see that, you realise that cows belong in woodlands. So I'm an agroecological farmer from the northeast of Scotland, as well as being on the board of Nature Scott. And the way that I work with the grazier business that I run with my husband is that we only own a relatively small amount of land, but we work with local landowners to move our herd of rare and native breed cattle around other people's land to act as ecological engineers. So these cattle are perfectly adapted to being in Scotland. They are historic, rare breeds, and they represent a really culturally important part of our history in the uplands. So the integration of any farming process, so it could be growing crops or it could be livestock, with trees and woodland is known as agroforestry. And if it's particularly livestock, then it's known as silvopasture. And this idea of silvopasture, for me, represents one of the ultimate nature-based solutions in relation to how we address the challenges facing us, particularly within the agricultural sector. So using a living barn rather than building a shed obviously has environmental benefits, such as removing the requirement for use of building materials. And it means that we can keep our cattle outside all year round, which has massive health benefits for them. The trees provide shelter and shade at different times of the year, and these actually even have productivity benefits for the animals. The structural diversity that you find within a woodland, but one that has had optimal disturbance by large herbivores, can create the perfect conditions for a breadth of different plants and animal species to come into that space. So using the space above the livestock for the trees offers above ground carbon sequestration benefits and opportunities, but it also increases the types of habitat available, offering soil health benefits, increasing those mycorrhizal fungal networks underground, and it also, as I said, is better for animal welfare and allowing animals to exhibit really natural behaviours. It's incredible to see small calves learning how to use their mouths when they are playing with bushes and scrub and tree branches. So by raising livestock as part of the ecosystem, this idea of agroecology, where we view the farm as an ecosystem, we see multiple benefits. by enabling trees and livestock to coexist. It's increasing diversity, it's ensuring animal health, and it's creating space and time for those individuals, plants, non-human animals, to flourish. And that really is key to effective ecosystem functioning. So in addressing the climate crisis, for me, it's really clear that agroforestry is going to be an enabler for continued agricultural productivity, particularly in the uplands. It's a nature-based solution that has been used for centuries. This isn't new. Agroforestry has been around for a very, very long time, thousands of years, across the world, and it really can improve food security and livelihoods while sustainably managing our ecosystems and their functions. So next time you see cattle in a field, I want you to think about imposing in your mind a lovely woodland into that area and just think how much happier those animals would be, how much better for our environment it could be, and do what you can in whatever roles you have to highlight and promote this idea of integrating animals and trees. It doesn't have to be either or. And if you're on Twitter, look at the hashtag cows in trees because you'll see some beautiful examples.
Marvellous. Thank you so much, Nikki. Last but certainly not least, Elizabeth, founder of the Green Generation Initiative and African Green Person of the Year 2019, I'm told. Elizabeth, please.
Thank you. I will begin by saying that the climate crisis for me is also a nature crisis. And if we can channel our energy and resources to solutions that put people and our planet above profits, we will have halfway solved the climate crisis. But right now, we have seen the struggles of even putting nature at the front line when it comes to addressing the climate crisis, because the climate and the ecological crisis have for so long been treated as two separate crises, and yet they are one. For me, I know that nature-based solutions can awaken our deep sense and connection to the natural world, and they can remind us of who we are. When I founded the Green Generation Initiative, it was all out of the love for nature, and many people ask me if I have hopes for COP26, if I have hopes for the future, and my feedback is I do not hope, I love, because that's the main thing that continues to put me in a position where I can speak up for nature, because when you love nature, you will understand and feel the pain of nature, and you will do everything in your power and in your capacity to protect nature, because when we protect nature, we are protecting ourselves as the entire human race. But when we continue to be at war with nature, then we are at war with ourselves, with our future, and we are not being fair to the next generations. So I grew up in the woods, and I grew up in the most forested region in Kenya. And for all my childhood, it was about the trees ahead of me, the bushes besides me, seeing the clean streams, being able to have an opportunity to listen to the bird songs, see butterflies, things that we cannot see today because the natural world has continued to change over time. And even that natural world that my friends and I knew as children has completely changed before our eyes. The streams that were flowing so fast no longer flow in the same speed. The water levels have gone down. The forests and bushes you can clearly see on the other side because the trees are not as they used to be before. And the reason I founded the initiative is to get children to love nature, because for me that's the sense and that's the deep place where humanity needs to begin. We need to get back down to our roots and reconnect with the natural world, because then we will not have to be demanding to protect nature. It's going to come from deep within. And when I saw my ecosystems and the forest landscape being degraded, I was deeply disturbed. I was angry, I was furious. But that anger also gave me a hunger to want to do something about challenges like deforestation, challenges like the climate crisis. So I started with a campaign that I dubbed Adopt a Tree campaign, where I would ensure that every child in every school in my country would get a chance to plant and adopt a tree each in the school compound. And this was to get them to become a generation of environmentally conscious individuals, and at the same time be part and parcel of the restoration efforts in my country. Every country right now is supposed to be at about 10% of their forest cover, and my country is currently at 7.3% forest cover. And this is one of the initiatives that's also trying to be part and parcel of the national initiatives to attain the 10% forest cover and possibly surpass the 10% forest cover. So I do believe that our energies and efforts should be channeled towards nature-based solutions. So along the way, while working with children, I also realized that this is the group that is the most impacted by the climate crisis. They need food, they need water, but they are not getting this because the climate crisis has continued to cause so much in terms of the droughts, the floods, the landslides, mudslides. The children are the ones who have to be the most impacted. And on the other hand, women are the ones who have to walk for long distances to get food and water for their children and their families. So I thought to myself, how can we use this triggering initiative to get food to the children? And so we started to establish food forests where we could pick designated corners in the school compound, and there we would plant mixed species of fruit trees. And this would mean a nutritious source of food for the children at the end of the day, because most of them have to walk for long distances as well to get their way to school, and it's not fair if they are going to school but they do not have food to eat, they do not have water to drink, and the environment around them is not conducive. So yes, let's green the schools around them and give them an opportunity to be able to connect with nature, and also give them an opportunity to be able to deal with the challenges of the climate crisis. And the other thing we focus on is environmental education that is experiential and practical, because the children are not only the most impacted by the climate crisis, they are also the ones that seem to be doing most of the work right now in terms of what needs to be done. And they need to feel part of the solution. They need to be involved in everything that is happening right now. And so we focus on enlightening them and making sure that they understand what's happening. And I'll give a very practical example of instances where we've taken children to streams that have been polluted, streams that were once clean but right now are flowing with plastic waste. And I remember two questions that these children asked me when I brought them to this stream. They asked me, who did this? And another child asked me, what can we do about this? So this is a generation of action-oriented people that want to see change. They want to see their natural ecosystems protected. And the least that the world can give back is to join in and do much more, because we are, this generation, and we do not have much of the power or all the needed resources to do what's needed to be done in terms of keeping 1.5 alive. And that is why the young people, in addition to that, are calling upon the leaders to do more, because we cannot do this on our own. And at the end of the day, the gap between the pledges and commitments we are seeing even here at COP26 are nowhere close to getting us to 1.5. So there's clearly so much that needs to be done, but we are not sitting back. We are also doing the work on the ground, and I think it's time for the rest of the world to do what needs to be done and to continue joining in and focus on also nature-based solutions, because they will awaken our deep connection with the natural world, and they will remind us of who we are. And when we remember who we are, I don't think we will continue to destroy our global commons, and we will not continue to destroy nature. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Elizabeth, for that really wonderful contribution, and indeed for your leadership on these subjects. Thank you. So we have a few questions coming through on Slido, which we can take a few minutes on. One here, actually, which I've picked up as we've been going along on the concept of nature-based solutions. Some would wonder whether there is a risk of this becoming a colonization agenda. and by rich nations and businesses seeking to offset their responsibilities through nature rather than dealing with some of the core issues. The question is, does the panel recognise this risk? And if they do see it, how can we avoid it? I don't know if anyone... Sonia, would you like to have a go at that? Because, probably big multinationals might be the place where people would first think about this.
I'm very happy to, Tony. And it is a risk that we recognise. And I think we need to be really cautious. And it comes back to what I said before around nature-based solutions. We have to do it in a sensitive way that recognises that the cultures, the people actually locally know more about what needs to happen than actually someone sitting in London, frankly. So the trick with crafting the right nature-based solutions is looking at the context, both socially and environmentally. However, the other piece around offsetting, I think, is a really good watch out. We need to be careful that we don't absolve ourselves the responsibilities, which is why, for us, we're looking much more at something called insetting, which is how do we drive action aligned with our footprint in those areas where we have our supply chain. So we don't absolve ourselves of the responsibility, but look for solutions in those places where we're active and, frankly, contributing to some of the problems that we see. So driving approaches that involve local people and draw on their knowledge, but also looking at solutions that cover the parts of our footprint which are most relevant.
Malinding, would you like to come back on that one?
Yes, I mean, definitely that risk is there. An example is currently the degraded rice fields that we are trying to restore using mangroves. A lot of countries in Europe, as well as even companies, look at this opportunity since it's a very low-hanging fruit as a way of, carbon offsetting. I mean, the carbon credit kind of thing. So such agreements are often very easy to go, at least at the national level. But when you do that, you run the risk of actually moving land from the traditional rice growers who own the land, abandoned because they could not do much with it. But once you bring in mangrove, it becomes productive. The ownership issues come in, management, and there is always this risk. And I think eventually one has to really understand the package you are dealing with when it comes to how carbon offset proposals come in and what it means. For me, any meeting I go, I say, well, what is it in it for us? I mean, it's so easy now. We are having millions at our doorstep, when, but we don't know what it is for the long term. I mean, but again, yes, this is there.
Thank you very much, Malinding. Actually, Nikki, I've been picking up lately on social media some concerns about big land ownership interests in Scotland and indeed in England becoming more kind of vested with resources as a result of going into this space in ways which some people believe might exacerbate inequalities. Do you pick up some of that in your work?
Yeah, definitely. And I think that as a grazier, my responsibility is to work with people who are buying up land and particularly who are aiming to rewild estates. And we're seeing that in Scotland is happening quite a lot. And it's I think what's really important is that we open the conversation and we have discussions. And for example, I can speak from a very personal point of view. For me, it's about getting in touch with people who are buying land very early on and saying, if there's anything I can do to help, if there's any advice, if there's connections that you would like me to help you make, then I can do that. And just giving people access to not local knowledge. And I think, that if we... I'm not going to go into the history of the clearances, for example, but there's historic concern and real, I think, a risk of people feeling like we're having a kind of clearances 2.0. And actually what needs to happen is that if we're going to rewild, that we re-people at the same time, right. And that we don't just talk about, there's these green sustainable jobs. Actually, what does that look like? Who's employed? They can't just be in service industries. It can't just be about ecotourism. We have to find ways of meaningful, dignified work being made available to people in local communities and to re-people these areas in a way that embeds the communities into their natural sort of, the natural space and into the nature around them. So yeah, there is a risk, but it's about people who have those concerns taking action and opening up the conversation and having the debate and being involved as much as they can.
Thanks ever so much, Nikki. Elizabeth, do you have a perspective on this, working from your community level? I'm sure you will.
Yeah, I would like to respond to this on a global perspective and say that, yes, there's a risk, and we are seeing people using, I would say, corporations and governments, big corporations and governments, using nature-based solutions as an excuse to not do anything to address the climate crisis. Because at the end of the day, it's not about pretending to be taking action. And one of the things that I hoped everyone would do out of this COP26 is to not let the lies take over. And in a big perspective, we can get people who are pretending to take action by saying, you know, we are planting trees in this place, but yet you won't stop investing in fossil fuels. It's hypocrisy to me, and I think what we need to focus on is making sure that in addition, I mean, the point is not stopping, it's not putting one side of the action aside and saying, yes, we are focusing on nature-based solutions. It should be that in addition to stopping investments in fossil fuels, let us now massively increase nature regeneration and make sure that all our remaining natural ecosystems continue to stay intact. Because we cannot be focusing on nature-based solutions, but then same corporations are the ones that are fueling deforestation. They're the ones that are taking land away from indigenous communities. I think it's supposed to be an entire focus on all the solutions and not using one solution to show the world as though we are taking action and yet we are not. Yeah.
Thank you very much indeed, Elizabeth. Mike, final word on this big subject. We're out of time, unfortunately, so brief if you don't mind.
I think the key thing is that nature has to be part of the solution, the big global solution. How we actually do it really matters. It needs to be good nature-based solutions. So it comes, I'm going to actually say again what I said at the start. We need good science, really good practical action on the ground, thorough involvement of the local community and leadership by them. And finally, let's not forget we also need to protect those remaining intact ecosystems that we do have around the world, which is so important to the planetary health.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, thank you all of our panellists. As expected, in a very short time and with the pressure of having to distill key messages, we've actually extracted a great deal of wisdom from a short amount of time. And actually, you know, the huge amount of insights we've got there, many things we could pull out. I think the thing for me that I take away from the conversation this morning is about the need for us to think differently as we approach this twin crises of nature and climate change. And that thinking to really be based upon the idea of integrated approaches. And I think we've heard today about the need to integrate the global agenda into community level approaches, the need to be thinking about how we combine human needs with the needs of the restoration of nature, agroforestry being a great example of that, how we need to combine what appear like competing agendas, climate change, nature recovery and health as one single strategy, and to be thinking about how we can combine ecosystem and economy and not to see profit and planet as separate. And then we've had the very strong message around the need for good science, and there's definitely a need for that, but also an integration of data with philosophy and to be combining the way in which we analyse with a love of nature. And I think that came through very strongly today. So these are the dimensions of the integrated thinking that I think came from the discussion today. And one or two new ideas that I'd not heard before, the idea of inset rather than offset. I love that. That will be recycled like all good environmental ideas are. So just finally then, a big thank you to our panellists, Elizabeth, Malanding, Mike, Nikki and Sonia. Thank you so much for the wisdom. We go away enriched. Thank you.